All the staff avoided the rude billionaire CEO until the new black waitress stood her ground. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. The room was filled with the sound of clinking glasses, soft murmurs, and the occasional polite laughter. It was a usual high-end evening at the exclusive restaurant in downtown Los Angeles, a place where the world's elite came to dine, make deals, and showcase their wealth. The chandeliers hung low, casting a warm glow on the polished marble floors. The waitstaff moved swiftly between tables, ensuring everything ran smoothly. But tonight, all eyes were on one table. At the head sat Raymond Holt, a billionaire CEO with a reputation for being tough, demanding, and ruthlessly competitive. His company, Holt Industries, was worth billions of dollars, and he was known for making decisions that affected the stock market with just a word. He was a man who commanded attention whenever he entered a room. His presence was powerful, and his attitude even more so. He was dressed in a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's annual salary, with a diamond-studded cufflink that caught the light every time he gestured. Holt looked down at the menu, barely glancing up when the waiter offered the wine list. He was used to being in control, used to having people bend to his will. The staff here at the Palisade restaurant, with its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city, were no exception. They knew the drill. Serve, smile, and don't speak unless spoken to. Holt's reputation preceded him. He had a way of making people feel insignificant, almost invisible, with just a glance. His presence was a reminder of how small most people were in comparison to his wealth and influence. But tonight, there was one person who wasn't going to bend. A new waitress, named Naomi Brooks, had just started her shift at the restaurant. Naomi was different from the others. She wasn't intimidated by wealth or power. She had seen enough hardship in her life to understand that no amount of money could define her worth. Naomi, a black woman in her late 20s, had worked her way up from humble beginnings. She wasn't just a waitress, she was a survivor. Raised in a tough neighborhood, Naomi knew the value of hard work, respect, and standing up for herself. Her calm demeanor and quiet strength had often been her armor in a world that was quick to underestimate her. As she walked past Holt's table, she could feel the condescending glances from the other staff members. They avoided making eye contact with him, too afraid of his presence. But Naomi didn't flinch. She continued walking with purpose, her tray balanced perfectly in her hands. She was used to being ignored, used to being the invisible person in the room. But not tonight. Holt barely noticed her as she approached the table to refill his glass. His eyes were fixed on his phone, tapping away as if the people around him didn't matter. "More wine, sir?" Naomi asked in a calm, clear voice, her tone professional yet firm. Holt didn't even look up. "Just pour it," he muttered dismissively, as though she were nothing more than a servant. Naomi could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just any dinner service. This was a moment where she could either shrink back into the background like the others or stand her ground. She chose the latter. She carefully poured the wine, making sure to fill his glass just right. As she set the bottle down, Holt looked up for the first time, his eyes narrowing as he noticed the quiet confidence in her stance. He sneered, clearly not expecting her to challenge the usual dynamic. "You think you can serve me?" he scoffed. Naomi met his gaze directly, her posture unwavering. "I believe I'm doing my job, sir," she replied, her voice steady. Holt's smirk faltered slightly. This was not the response he was used to. In this room full of people who catered to his every whim, this woman, this waitress, was the first to challenge him. It was subtle, but it was a challenge nonetheless. Holt's face turned red as he tried to regain control of the situation. He looked around at the other diners, clearly trying to assert his dominance. Once again, but Naomi didn't back down. She didn't blink or look away. For the first time, someone had stood up to him in a way that made him uncomfortable. The room was silent, the tension palpable. This wasn't just about wine or service. This was about respect. Holt's smirk was gone now, replaced with a mixture of irritation and confusion. He wasn't used to being spoken to like this, not by someone like her. But Naomi wasn't someone to be dismissed. She was done being invisible. As Naomi continued to stand her ground, Holt's eyes flickered with a mix of surprise and disdain. He wasn't used to being challenged, not in public, and certainly not by someone who he saw as just another member of the help. For a moment, the air in the room seemed to hang heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. Naomi stood silently, her gaze unwavering, not allowing him to shrink her presence. She had felt this before, the sting of being underestimated, of being dismissed based on nothing more than her appearance. But tonight, she wasn't going to let it slide. Holt let out a low, almost dismissive chuckle as if to regain his composure. "You know, it's adorable how you think you're in charge here," he sneered. Naomi's eyes narrowed, and her jaw tightened ever so slightly. "I never said I was in charge," she replied evenly. "But I do know how to do my job, and I do it well." The words stung Holt in a way he wasn't prepared for. He expected to break people down, not have someone stand up to him so calmly. The other staff members, who had been quietly avoiding Holt's wrath all evening, now looked on with a mixture of discomfort and curiosity. They were used to bowing down to the powerful CEO, but they couldn't help but notice the unshakable confidence Naomi displayed. Holt's smile faded into something more sinister. "You really want to make this difficult, don't you?" he said, his voice dropping low. The room went quiet, and for a split second, Naomi could feel the weight of the eyes on her. Everyone was watching now. Holt had the power to make or break careers, and yet here she was, staring him down like he was just another man with too much arrogance. But Naomi wasn't afraid. She had nothing to lose. "I don't want to make this difficult," Naomi said, her voice steady. "But I will stand up for myself, no matter who you are." The words hung in the air as a small ripple of murmurs spread through the restaurant. Naomi's defiance, her courage, had struck a chord. Holt, who had spent his life using his money and status to control situations, was at a loss for words. The silence that followed was deafening, and for the first time that evening, Holt found himself in an unfamiliar position. He was the one being scrutinized. The other diners, who had been too busy enjoying their meals or speaking in hushed tones about their business deals, were now all looking at him, waiting for his next move. Holt's fingers drummed on the table, the rhythmic tapping a sign of his growing frustration. He couldn't stand being the center of attention for the wrong reasons. It was a feeling he wasn't used to. He opened his mouth to say something, but Naomi didn't wait for him to speak. She placed the bottle of wine down with a sharp, deliberate motion. "I'm not here for your approval," Naomi said calmly, turning to walk away. Her words, though simple, were powerful in their delivery. Holt sat there, stunned for a moment, his usual composure slipping. It wasn't until Naomi reached the other side of the room that he finally spoke again, though this time his voice was much quieter. "This isn't over," he muttered, but Naomi didn't flinch. As she walked back to the kitchen, she could hear the whispers behind her. The staff members, some of whom had been too afraid to even look at Holt directly, were now looking at her with a new sense of respect. Naomi's action had done something unexpected. It had shaken the balance of power in that room. Holt had made his wealth by exploiting others, by keeping people beneath him. He had never encountered someone like Naomi, who didn't just accept being dismissed. She had stood up for herself and, in doing so, had made everyone in that room rethink their roles. The rest of the evening played out in a strange silence. Holt continued to dine, but the atmosphere had shifted. The other guests seemed more aware of his behavior, and Naomi's confidence had left a lingering impression. She wasn't a part of the background noise anymore. She was a presence. A few hours later, after the dinner crowd had dissipated and the restaurant was quieter, Naomi found herself cleaning up, reflecting on the evening. As she wiped down the tables, she couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride. It wasn't about winning an argument or making Holt look foolish. It was about maintaining her dignity and standing up for what was right. In the quiet of the empty restaurant, Naomi realized that, even in a world dominated by wealth and power, her own strength was something no one could take away. As the days went on, Naomi could feel the ripple effects of her stand against Holt's arrogance. It wasn't just the staff who noticed her newfound confidence. The other patrons at the restaurant began to look at her differently too. The usual dismissal of her presence, the way people only ever saw her as a waitress and not as a person, had started to fade. It was subtle at first, a smile here, a nod there. But it was enough to make Naomi realize that something had changed. She wasn't just another face in the background anymore. Naomi continued her shifts, moving through the motions of her job with the same dedication and precision. But now, her every step seemed more purposeful. She was no longer just doing her job. She was making a statement with every action, with every word. One evening, as she was clearing a table near the window, Naomi saw Holt walk in again, this time with a group of investors. He seemed more subdued, quieter than usual. The once dominant presence he held in the room was now slightly diminished. His eyes briefly met Naomi's, and for a split second, she saw something flicker behind his usual smirk, a hint of respect, maybe even acknowledgement. Holt sat at a table in the corner, surrounded by his colleagues, speaking in low tones. Naomi couldn't help but notice how they all seemed to hang on his every word, their faces eager to please, to get a glimpse into the world he controlled. Yet, something was different. The air in the room felt less tense, more relaxed. Holt no longer commanded the same oppressive attention he had the night Naomi had stood her ground. As Naomi made her rounds, she overheard snippets of conversations that would have once been entirely out of her reach. One of the investors mentioned how Holt had been struggling with a recent deal, a multi-million-dollar merger that was on the verge of collapsing. "I thought he had this in the bag," the investor said. "Now it seems like everything's slipping through his fingers." Naomi's heart beat faster as she overheard the discussion. She knew that Holt's empire was built on a fragile foundation, one that could crumble if the right people decided to stand up to him. She didn't know how much of this was true, but the way the investor spoke made it clear that Holt's carefully crafted image of invincibility had started to crack. As the evening went on, Holt seemed increasingly agitated. His usual bravado was nowhere to be found. Naomi, in her quiet strength, moved with purpose, never lingering too long at any table, but always aware of the power dynamics shifting in the room. Holt had spent his life using wealth and influence to control others, but tonight, it seemed as if the tides were turning. After the dinner, as Naomi was cleaning up, she overheard Holt speaking to his assistant in a low, frustrated voice. "How did she know?" he muttered. "How did that waitress see right through me?" Naomi didn't know why she felt a small rush of satisfaction at hearing those words. Maybe it was because she realized that Holt, the man who had once belittled her, now found himself grappling with something he couldn't control, his own vulnerability. The next day, Naomi received a surprising message. It was an email from the restaurant's management team. They wanted to speak to her. Confused, Naomi made her way to the office, wondering what this was about. As she walked in, the manager, a middle-aged man with a friendly smile, looked up from his desk. "Naomi, we've been meaning to talk to you," he said, his tone serious but not unfriendly. "There's been a lot of talk about how you handled yourself during that dinner with Mr. Holt. The staff have noticed a change in the way people are interacting with you. And frankly, so have we." Naomi felt a knot form in her stomach. She wasn't sure where this was going. "You've shown a level of professionalism and strength that we admire," the manager continued. "And while we don't condone any sort of conflict with customers, we also know that you stood up for yourself in a way that has had a positive impact here. The staff feel more empowered. They feel like they can stand their ground without fear of retribution." Naomi didn't know what to say. She had just been doing what felt right, but hearing it from her manager made her realize just how much her actions had resonated with others. The manager paused for a moment, then leaned forward, a small smile forming on his face. "Mr. Holt spoke with the owner last night," he said. "And while he didn't exactly apologize, he did acknowledge that your actions made him rethink some of his behavior. He's asked to have you serve him tonight." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. Holt wanted her to serve him? She had expected some kind of apology or a rebuke, but not this. "We know it's a bit unusual," the manager added, "but we think it's a sign that Holt respects you. He wouldn't ask for you if he didn't." Naomi felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. She wasn't sure how she felt about serving him again, but she knew one thing. She had nothing to prove. She had already proven that her worth wasn't defined by her job or anyone's opinion of her. That evening, as she approached Holt's table once more, she did so with the same calm confidence she had carried the night they first crossed paths. Holt looked up as she arrived, his expression unreadable. "I'll have the usual," he said flatly, not making eye contact. Naomi simply nodded, not bothering to engage in any further small talk. She was no longer interested in playing by his rules. As she left the table, she couldn't help but notice that Holt seemed a little less imposing than before. Maybe it was the change in her own perspective. Or maybe, just maybe, he was finally starting to understand what it felt like to be seen for who he truly was. Naomi stood at the bar, absent-mindedly polishing a glass as she overheard the conversations around her. The usual chatter of guests discussing business deals and personal triumphs filled the air, but today, it was different. The air had changed in the restaurant. The staff was more confident, their heads held higher. She could feel it in the way they interacted with each other and the way they interacted with the customers. For the first time in a long while, they felt seen. Naomi had done something that had changed the dynamic of the restaurant, something subtle but profound. And while she had never expected to become the center of attention, she was starting to understand the impact of her actions. Holt's behavior had shifted. The tension between him and the staff was no longer as thick as it had been before. There was a new level of respect in the air. Holt's usual smirk had softened, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement that Naomi wasn't someone he could easily dismiss. It wasn't just about the small victory in standing up to him. It was about the shift in how she viewed herself. She wasn't just the invisible server. She was a person with her own strength, her own voice, and her own worth. Naomi didn't know what would happen next, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had nothing to lose and everything to gain. As the evening wore on, Naomi couldn't help but notice the subtle way Holt watched her from across the room. He didn't seem to be as consumed with his usual bravado. Instead, he observed her with a quiet respect, almost as though he was seeing her for the first time. It was strange. She had been serving him for months, but it had always been in the background, unnoticed. Now, things had shifted. She wasn't just another person in the room. She was part of the story, and Holt seemed to recognize that. As Naomi continued her rounds, she overheard a few whispers from other guests, who seemed to be taking note of her as well. They spoke in hushed tones, commenting on how the staff was different now, how they seemed more confident, more professional. Naomi couldn't help but smile to herself. She wasn't just doing her job anymore. She was changing the narrative, rewriting the story that had been told about people like her. People who were often seen but never truly noticed. That night, as the last few patrons left the restaurant, Naomi was once again called into the manager's office. She walked in, unsure of what to expect. The manager, who had always been warm but formal, looked at her with a serious expression. "Naomi," he began, "there's something we need to talk about." Naomi's heart raced, but she steadied herself. "What's going on?" she asked her. Voice calm. "It's about your interaction with Holt the other night," he said. Naomi nodded, already knowing what this was about. "The owner of the restaurant has been in contact with Holt," he continued, "and he wanted to extend an invitation. He's offered to give you a special promotion, something we don't offer to just anyone." Naomi felt her pulse quicken. A promotion? She hadn't expected this at all. The manager paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. "We've been impressed by your professionalism and the way you handled yourself with Mr. Holt. It's not just about standing up to him. It's about the way you've changed the atmosphere in this restaurant. You've given everyone here a new sense of empowerment." Naomi took a deep breath. She hadn't expected her actions to have such an impact, but hearing it from the manager made it real. It was more than just a personal victory. It was something that had rippled through the entire team. "The promotion is yours if you want it," the manager added, looking at her with a knowing smile. "But it's up to you. We just wanted to recognize what you've done here." Naomi stood there for a moment, absorbing the offer. A promotion? She wasn't sure if she was ready for it, but at the same time, she knew she couldn't go back. She had come too far. "I'll take it," Naomi said finally, her voice steady. The manager smiled, clearly pleased with her decision. "Great. We'll take care of the details tomorrow. Just know that this is a recognition of more than just your work ethic. It's about the way you've helped change this place for the better." Naomi left the manager's office that night feeling a sense of pride she had never felt before. The restaurant, which had once felt like a place where she was invisible, was now a place where she had a voice. And for the first time, Naomi realized that she had power, not the kind that came with money, but the kind that came with standing firm in her own truth. The next day, as she walked through the restaurant, she felt the eyes of her co-workers on her. There was no longer any tension between them. They saw her, and they respected her. The respect wasn't just about the promotion. It was about what Naomi had done for them all. She had shown them that they, too, could stand their ground. Holt, for all his wealth and power, had learned something valuable that day. Naomi had proved that standing up for yourself wasn't about being loud or aggressive. It was about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. Holt might have thought he could control people with his money, but Naomi had shown him that true power didn't come from wealth. It came from within. As Naomi walked into the restaurant the next day, she felt a strange sense of confidence in the air. The previous night's events had made her a quiet legend among the staff. It was not just the promotion that had changed things, it was the way they all seemed to hold their heads higher. They weren't just employees anymore. They were a team, united by the subtle yet undeniable power Naomi had brought into the space. Naomi was no longer just a waitress. She had become a symbol of strength and self-respect. The staff greeted her with smiles and nods as she made her way to the back of the house. Even the manager, who had always been cordial but professional, now looked at her with newfound respect. Naomi's actions had inspired them all to stand up for themselves, to demand the respect they deserved. She didn't know it, but she had become the catalyst for change in a place that had long been ruled by the subtle but suffocating presence of wealth and power. As Naomi settled into her shift, she couldn't help but notice Holt's absence. He hadn't been back since the night they had shared that awkward but life-changing encounter. She didn't know why, but part of her had expected him to show up again, to challenge her in some way. But he hadn't. The restaurant continued to run as usual, and yet, Naomi felt a shift in the dynamic. It was as if the room had taken a collective breath and exhaled, relieved that someone had finally stood up to the billionaire CEO. The restaurant was still buzzing with energy, but there was a sense of quiet dignity that hung in the air. The evening passed without incident, and by the time Naomi was finishing her shift, the restaurant had emptied out, and the only sound left was the soft clink of glassware being cleaned. As she prepared to leave, the manager approached her with a smile. "Naomi, can I have a word?" he asked. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what to expect now. "Sure," she said, following him to the back office. "What's up?" "I just wanted to let you know that Mr. Holt reached out to the owner today," the manager began. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "What did he want?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "He wanted to apologize," the manager said, looking slightly surprised himself. "He didn't exactly say it like that, but it was clear he wanted to make amends for the way he treated you that night." Naomi felt a wave of unexpected emotions rush over her. She hadn't expected an apology, and certainly not from someone like Holt. But here it was, an acknowledgement that her actions had made an impact. "What did you say?" Naomi asked, still processing the news. "I told him that you weren't someone to be treated that way," the manager replied, his voice steady but firm. "I told him that you'd earned your place here, and that no one should ever be made to feel small, no matter who they are." Naomi felt a lump form in her throat. It wasn't often that people stuck up for her, and hearing those words from the manager filled her with gratitude. "I also told him that if he wanted to make things right, he should come back and treat you with the respect you deserve," the manager continued. "And that's what he plans to do." Naomi didn't know what to say. Holt, the billionaire who had once looked down on her, was now being asked to show respect, not just for her, but for the entire staff. It was a moment of validation, a moment where her quiet strength had shifted the power dynamics in a way she had never imagined. Later that evening, as Naomi was finishing up her shift, she saw Holt walk through the door again. This time, however, he wasn't the same man who had entered weeks ago. He wasn't the arrogant, dismissive CEO who had thought he could control everything and everyone. No, this time, he seemed different, more subdued, more aware of the people around him. Naomi caught his eye as he walked past, and for a moment, they simply stared at each other. There was no smirk, no condescension. Instead, there was something new, respect. Holt approached the bar, where Naomi was standing, and for the first time, he addressed her directly. "Naomi," he said, his voice quieter than usual, "I owe you an apology. I've been a jerk, and I know it. You didn't deserve the way I treated you." Naomi was taken aback. She hadn't expected this. She had imagined a confrontation, maybe even a dismissal, but not this. "I'm not looking for an apology," Naomi replied, her voice calm. "I just wanted to be treated like a person." Holt nodded, seemingly at a loss for words. "You've earned more than that," he said, his tone genuine. "You've earned my respect." Naomi didn't know what to say. She wasn't interested in hearing excuses, but she could tell that Holt was sincere. His apology wasn't just words. It was a recognition that his actions had consequences, that his wealth and power didn't give him the right to treat people however he pleased. That evening, as Naomi left the restaurant, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't just about the apology. It was about the fact that she had stood her ground, and in doing so, had earned something much more valuable than an apology. She had earned respect, not just from Holt, but from everyone around her. She had proven that no matter who you are, no one can diminish your worth unless you let them. The next few weeks felt like a turning point for Naomi. She continued to work at the restaurant, but everything felt different. Holt's apology had been a watershed moment, not just for her, but for the entire staff. Naomi had set a precedent that no one should be treated as invisible, no matter their position. It was as if a wave had passed through the entire restaurant, and with it, the attitude toward the staff had changed. They were no longer the background to the story of the wealthy patrons. They were part of the narrative. Naomi wasn't just respected by the staff, but by the customers as well. There was a subtle shift. People who once barely noticed her now greeted her with a smile, treated her like a human being. It wasn't the kind of recognition that came with grand gestures or words. It was the kind that came in the quiet moments, like when a guest made eye contact and smiled, or when someone actually asked for her name. Naomi's life outside the restaurant had also started to change. Her confidence grew with each passing day. She was no longer afraid to speak up for herself, no longer afraid to take control of situations that had once made her feel small. She had stood her ground with Holt, and in doing so, had realized something powerful. Her voice mattered. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a person with her own value, her own strength. One evening, as she was clearing a table near the bar, she overheard a conversation that caught her attention. A group of executives were seated at a nearby table, talking business as they sipped their drinks. Naomi hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the words she heard made her stop in her tracks. "I've heard Holt Industries is on the verge of a major merger," one of the men said. "He's having trouble closing it. I don't think anyone's been able to get through to him lately." Another man nodded. "He's been acting differently, almost like he's lost his touch. I heard he had a big run-in with a waitress at that restaurant downtown. A woman named Naomi. People are saying it really shook him." Naomi's heart raced as she heard the words. She had no idea that her brief encounter with Holt had spread beyond the walls of the restaurant. She had no idea that it had made such an impact on people outside the restaurant. She finished clearing the table, but her mind was spinning. Holt, the man who had once belittled her, the man who had thought he could control everything, was now being talked about because of her. She didn't know whether to feel proud or unsettled, but one thing was clear. Her actions had changed more than just her own life. They had affected others in ways she hadn't even imagined. The next day, Naomi's phone rang while she was at home. It was a number she didn't recognize, but something told her to answer. "Hello," she said hesitantly. "Is this Naomi Brooks?" a woman's voice asked. Naomi nodded, even though the woman couldn't see her. "This is Karen Lane. I'm with Holt Industries. I'm reaching out on behalf of Mr. Holt." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. "Mr. Holt wanted me to speak with you," Karen continued. "He's aware of what happened at the restaurant, and he's been thinking about it a lot. He wanted to personally offer his appreciation for how you handled things that night. He realizes now how important respect is, not just for the staff, but for everyone." Naomi listened in silence, unsure of what to say. She had never expected this kind of follow-up, especially not from someone in Holt's company. "Mr. Holt wanted to offer you something," Karen said. "He's made a generous donation to a cause of your choosing. And he's also offering you a spot in an upcoming leadership training program his company is sponsoring. He believes you have leadership potential, Naomi, and he wants to help you develop it." Naomi was stunned. She had never imagined that her actions would lead to something like this. Holt, the man who had once dismissed her, was now offering to help her grow in ways she had never thought possible. She wasn't sure how to respond. She had already proven to herself that she didn't need anyone's approval to succeed. But the offer was tempting. It wasn't just about the money or the opportunity. It was about what it represented. It was a recognition of her worth, a recognition that had been long overdue. I appreciate the offer, Naomi said slowly. But I'm not sure I'm ready for that. I've already learned everything I need to know. I'm not interested in becoming part of the system that's kept people like me down. I'm interested in doing things my own way. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Naomi could almost hear Karen's surprise. I understand, Karen finally said. Mr. Holt respects your decision. He just wanted to show that he values what you did. If you ever change your mind, the offer will always stand. Naomi hung up the phone and sat down, her heart racing. She had made the decision that felt right for her. She didn't need Holt's validation or anyone else's. She was carving her own path, and it didn't need to align with anyone's idea of success but her own. Over the next few weeks, Naomi's reputation continued to grow. The restaurant, once a place of quiet subjugation, was now a place where the staff felt empowered. And as for Naomi, she continued to rise above, not because of any external validation, but because she had finally learned to see her own worth. She had stood her ground, and in doing so, she had become something greater than anyone, including herself, had ever expected. Naomi had become something more than just a waitress. She had become a symbol of change, not just within the walls of the restaurant, but in the minds of those around her. The shift in the atmosphere was undeniable. The other staff members, once quiet and reserved, now carried themselves with more confidence. They spoke up when they were mistreated. They demanded respect, just as Naomi had done. The effect Naomi had started spreading throughout the restaurant had a ripple effect beyond the kitchen doors. Guests began to take notice. No longer did they see just another face behind the counter. They saw someone who had the courage to stand tall, someone who wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo. Naomi's story had become an unspoken narrative among the patrons, one that inspired quiet admiration. It wasn't long before her story reached even further. One afternoon, as Naomi was preparing for her shift, she received a call from an unknown number. Normally, she would have let it go to voicemail, but something told her to pick up. "Hello?" she said, unsure who was on the other end. "Hi, is this Naomi Brooks?" A woman's voice asked, smooth and professional. "Yes, this is she. My name is Emily Harper. I work for The Times," the woman said. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. "The Times?" she repeated, surprised. "Yes, I'm a reporter with the business section. We've heard about your story at the restaurant, and we'd like to do a feature on you." Naomi was stunned. She had never imagined that her actions would garner such attention. "A feature on me?" Naomi asked, still processing the request. "Yes," Emily replied. "Your story is a powerful one, Naomi. You stood up to a billionaire CEO, and it's resonated with people in ways you might not even realize. We believe it could inspire others to find their own voice and challenge the systems that have kept them in the shadows." Naomi paused, unsure of how to respond. She hadn't expected any kind of media attention, and the idea of being in the spotlight made her nervous. But at the same time, she understood the importance of sharing her story. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all the people who had been overlooked, all the people who had been too afraid to speak out. "I'm honored that you want to do a feature," Naomi said after a long pause. "But I'm not sure I'm the right person for this." "I understand your hesitation," Emily said kindly. "But your story is important, Naomi. It's not just about a single act of defiance. It's about the power of standing up for yourself, of demanding respect in a world that often tells you you're not worth it. Your voice matters, and we want to share it with the world." Naomi was quiet for a moment, the weight of Emily's words sinking in. She had always kept a low profile, never seeking attention, but now she realized that telling her story could make a difference. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a person who had found the strength to stand up for herself, and in doing so, she had inspired others to do the same. "Okay," Naomi said, her voice steady. "I'll do it." The next week, Naomi sat down with Emily Harper in the quiet corner of the restaurant during her lunch break. The interview was easy at first, with Emily asking about Naomi's background and her experience in the restaurant industry. But soon, the conversation turned to the pivotal moment, the night Naomi had stood up to Holt. Naomi found herself reliving the experience, but this time, it felt different. She wasn't just recounting a moment of confrontation. She was reflecting on how much that moment had changed her, how it had made her see her own worth in a way she never had before. "You've said in your interview that you didn't expect anything to come from your confrontation with Holt," Emily said as she scribbled notes. "But looking back, How do you feel about it now? What do you think it taught you? Naomi thought for a moment before answering. I think what it taught me is that I'm stronger than I realized. I used to think I had to just take whatever came my way, that I had no choice but to accept how people treated me. But standing up that night, in front of everyone, it made me realize that I can control my own narrative. I can decide how I let people treat me. Emily nodded, clearly moved by Naomi's words. That's incredibly powerful, she said. And what do you hope others take away from your story? Naomi smiled softly. I hope they see that their voices matter. That no matter where they come from or what they do, they deserve to be treated with respect. And that sometimes, the best way to change things is to stand up, even when it feels like the odds are against you. By the time the article was published, Naomi's story had gone viral. It was shared by thousands of people who resonated with her message. They saw themselves in her struggle, in her courage, and in her triumph. Holt Industries may have been a powerful company, but Naomi had proven that no amount of wealth or power could silence someone who had found their voice. Naomi didn't need fame or accolades. She didn't need validation from anyone. What mattered was that she had found her worth and had used it to change not only her own life, but the lives of others around her. And that was more than enough. As Naomi continued to navigate her life after the article had been published, things began to settle into a new normal. She wasn't just the waitress who had stood up to a billionaire anymore. She was a woman who had carved a new path, one where respect, dignity, and self-worth were no longer negotiable. People in the restaurant began to see her differently, not just as a member of the wait staff, but as someone who had changed the atmosphere of the entire establishment. Her confidence became infectious, and slowly, the others began to stand up for themselves too. The staff, once intimidated by the power dynamics of the rich and influential customers, now carried themselves with newfound strength. They were no longer invisible to the people they served. They were seen, and that alone shifted the entire energy of the restaurant. Naomi's role had transcended beyond simply serving meals. She had become a mentor to her coworkers, sharing her experiences and offering advice on standing up for oneself. It wasn't about confrontation anymore. It was about understanding the value of your own voice. At home, Naomi began to feel a quiet pride. She had done something few people in her position had ever dared to do. She had faced an injustice head-on and walked away victorious, not because she had been given anything, but because she had taken what was rightfully hers, respect. Then, one evening, Naomi was caught off guard when her phone buzzed with another unexpected call. It was the owner of the restaurant. She had never been personally contacted by him before, so she answered immediately. Naomi, it's Ben, he said, his voice warm but serious. I wanted to take a moment to speak with you directly. First off, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for everything you've done. Not just for the restaurant, but for the team. I've been hearing nothing but praise from everyone. And it's clear that you've become a major part of the reason why the atmosphere here is so much different now. Naomi felt a bit of nervousness creep in, but she kept her tone calm. I just did what I thought was right, she said modestly. And it's made a difference, Ben said. I'm proud of the change you've brought here, and we've decided to recognize that. Starting next month, we're promoting you to a managerial position. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. She had never expected this. She had never even dreamed of moving beyond her role as a waitress. A managerial position, she repeated, still processing. Yes, Ben continued. You've shown a level of leadership and strength that we can't ignore. You're more than just someone who brings food to the table. You've become a leader, and we believe you can help guide the team to even greater success. It's time we acknowledge that. Naomi could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had worked hard, kept her head down, and focused on doing her job to the best of her ability. But she had never thought that one act of standing up to someone like Holt could lead to this kind of opportunity. I don't know what to say, she stammered. Just say yes, Ben said with a chuckle. You've earned it. Naomi took a moment, a wave of emotions rushing over her. She wasn't sure what this new chapter would look like, but she knew one thing for certain. She had earned it. This wasn't just some stroke of luck. This was the result of standing up, of demanding respect, and of showing others that their worth wasn't tied to their job title or the way they were treated by others. The next few weeks were filled with transition. Naomi took on her new managerial role, and while it was a challenge, she thrived in it. She didn't need to be perfect. She didn't need to know everything. She just needed to be herself. a woman who had found her voice and was now helping others find theirs. The restaurant thrived under this new leadership. The atmosphere was lighter, more collaborative. The customers began to notice the difference too, remarking on how much more professional the staff seemed. Naomi's rise was no longer just a story about her standing up to a billionaire. It had become a story about what happened when someone decided they weren't going to take disrespect anymore. It wasn't just about one moment in time. It was about the ripple effect that spread far beyond that night. Naomi had shown the world that standing up for yourself doesn't require violence or confrontation. It requires confidence, courage, and the willingness to demand what you deserve. And now, she was proving that every day, not just for herself, but for everyone who worked with her. One evening, as Naomi sat in her office, looking out over the restaurant floor, she realized something. She wasn't just a part of the restaurant anymore. She had helped reshape it. She had turned it into a place where respect was the foundation, not fear. And she knew that this was only the beginning. There was more work to be done, more people to inspire, and more stories to be written. But for the first time in her life, Naomi felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She had found her place in the world, not as someone who served others, but as someone who led with strength and integrity. Naomi stood in the center of the bustling restaurant, watching as the evening unfolded around her. The place that had once felt like a cage had now become a reflection of her own growth. Every corner of the space seemed alive with energy, from the vibrant conversations of the guests to the confidence radiating from the staff. There was an undeniable sense of pride in the air, something that hadn't existed when Naomi first started here. It was more than just the promotion or the recognition. It was the feeling that the culture had shifted, that people were no longer afraid to stand up for themselves, to demand what they deserved. Naomi had led this change, and now, she was seeing the fruits of her labor in the faces of her co-workers. She had proven that one person could make a difference, that a single act of courage could ripple through an entire community and reshape the way people thought about their worth. Holt was no longer a looming figure in the restaurant. He had come back a few more times, but each time, it was clear that the power dynamics had shifted. He no longer walked in with that air of superiority. Instead, he entered the space with quiet respect, nodding to Naomi when their eyes met, acknowledging the change without needing to speak a word. Naomi had long since stopped caring about whether Holt approved of her. She no longer needed his validation. What mattered was the respect she had earned and the impact she had made on her own terms. As she walked through the restaurant, Naomi couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. She had come a long way since the days when she had been invisible, walking silently through the rooms, her worth measured only by the tips she earned and the smiles she gave. Now, she was the one people turned to for guidance. Now, people saw her not just as a waitress, but as a leader. The thought filled her with a quiet strength. She wasn't just a product of the world she lived in anymore. She had become someone who shaped it, who determined how she would be treated. She had learned to stand her ground, to demand respect, and in doing so, had inspired others to do the same. But as much as Naomi had changed, so had the restaurant. It wasn't just about the promotion or the new opportunities. It was about the culture she had fostered. Respect was now at the core of everything. The staff worked together more harmoniously, and the guests who entered could feel the difference in the air. The arrogance that once filled the room had been replaced with a quiet, respectful energy. There was no longer a divide between the staff and the guests. Everyone, regardless of their position, was seen as valuable. The realization settled in. Naomi had not only changed her life, but had helped to change the lives of everyone around her. She had shown the power of standing up for oneself, of never accepting less than what you deserve. But her journey wasn't over. Naomi knew there was still work to be done. There were still people out there who needed to hear her story, who needed to understand that they, too, had the power to change the world around them. She wasn't done yet. As the night came to a close and the last of the guests filtered out, Naomi took a moment to step outside. The cool evening air felt refreshing as she breathed it in, letting it fill her lungs. She had earned this peace, this sense of contentment. But there was more waiting for her. Naomi knew that whatever came next, she was ready. She had learned the greatest lesson of all. Her worth wasn't tied to anyone else's perception of her. She didn't need anyone's approval. She had already proven her value. The world could try to keep her down, but she would always rise. With that thought, Naomi walked back into the restaurant, ready to continue her journey. She was no longer just a part of the system. She had become the one who would change it. In this powerful story of resilience and empowerment, a woman rises from being invisible to a respected leader, proving the transformative power of standing up for oneself. Naomi, a black woman working as a waitress, challenges the powerful CEO of a billion-dollar company, changing her life and the lives of those around her. This is not just another black story of hardship. It's a black story of courage, determination, and the relentless pursuit of respect. As Naomi navigates the complexities of power dynamics and discrimination, she not only earns the respect of her peers and customers, but also reshapes the atmosphere of the entire restaurant. Her journey serves as an inspiration to those who feel powerless, showing that standing up for your dignity can create ripple effects of change. Naomi's story is an example of how black stories can shift narratives and challenge societal expectations. With her newfound confidence, Naomi steps into a managerial role, leading by example and inspiring her colleagues to stand up for themselves. As the story unfolds, Naomi shows that the value of one's voice is immeasurable, and the strength to demand respect is within everyone. This black story resonates deeply, showing how courage and self-respect can break barriers and redefine success. Naomi's journey from waitress to leader is a testament to the power of black stories to change not only individual lives, but also the broader cultural landscape.